What's good, innies? It feels like it's been a while since I said that, but it's time for episode 2 of season 2, and this one is called Goodbye, Miss Selvig, a title meant to bookend the first episode. In this one, we're gonna find out what happened right after the OTC incident, but from the perspective of the outies. And yes, that includes Helly's outie. I know you were dying to know what her outie is really like, and today is your lucky day. As you probably have guessed, there are spoilers on the horizon, so now's the time to put this one on pause if you're not caught up yet. No worries, I'll hold the elevator till you come back. Big shout out to the channel patrons, the people who make this all possible. Many thanks to you. And I'd also like to welcome the newest members: Jessica, SES Spore, Savage Raptor, Nixa Shell, and Cosmic. Thank you so much for choosing to support the channel directly. I truly do appreciate it, and I hope this puts a smile on your face. So, I hope you're ready for round 2 because there's a lot to discuss. In other words, it's time to dive. So episode 2 begins much the same way the season opener did. We're listening to the sounds of the innies in their final moments before Mr. Milchick pulled the plug on the OTC. This time we're dropped into Mark's perspective. This is right after his outie had just finished screaming "she's alive" to a room full of people who have no idea what he's talking about. That is, except for one person, Devin, who picks up on what just happened and does the cool sister thing. She's the only person who knows what's going on with him at the moment. Next we jump over to Helly, who starts this episode rubbing her neck, no doubt thinking about the trouble her innie's been putting her through. There's a definite tension in the air here. We're immediately introduced to a new character, and from the looks of it, he seems like the Grainer type, maybe some kind of enforcer, assistant, but he seems like he's higher up. This guy shows up along with James here, and he doesn't look too pleased. So James approaches Helly with a disdainful look on his face, and he mutters the words, "Fetid Moppet." No doubt a criticism for letting her innie take control and botch the entire situation. There's a decidedly different energy coming from James here compared to when we last saw him. Get the sense that this kind of scolding is a normal interaction between these two, and this might be one of those parent-child situations where nothing she does is good enough. Anyway, that's all he had to say about it before Helly starts giving this guy, who is credited as Mr. Drummond, instructions on what to do next as far as damage control. So right away we're getting the sense that Helly is an active member of Lumen with aspirations to move up within the company. This girl's got goals. In fact, we find out soon enough that Helly is about as Lumen as it gets. In the next scene, Dylan is shown exiting the building, and it looks like he's got a little head injury, and he's being watched by Milchick from the floor above. Now, he has no idea why his head is hurting, and I'm sure he's gonna get the usual note with a Pips VIP reward. Totally worth it. And then we see Milkshake again with Helly, and she's telling him to clean up any messes the outies may have made on the outside, and she gives him the right to fire any of them at his discretion. It seems that way, at least. Helly then heads over to the conference room to meet with Cobell to discuss the night's events. Actually, let's call her Cobellvig. I like that. Shout out to Rickon. Helly mentions that they've already begun trying to spin the disaster with the media, and they're dealing with the innies who did the thing. Cobell is feeling a little slighted. It's the fact that the board won't meet with her after she basically saved the Severance project. She gets Helly instead. Now, Helly offers her a job as a way of saying thank you, but Cobellvig really wants an apology more than anything. The interesting thing about this conversation is that Cobell is okay with coming back to Lumen, but they don't want her back on the severed floor, so they make up this BS position for her, and it feels like they want to keep her close because they're worried about what she might do, but she catches whiff of the nonsense and decides to walk out. She'll think about it, she says. Good for Cobell. This character can cause so much trouble for Lumen as an adversary, and we need that. Now, remember the motorcyclist from the trailers? Well, we find out in the next scene that this was Milkshake all along. He's on his routes because he's been tasked with finding the outies, questioning them, and then firing them if needed. First, he drops in on outie Irv to deliver the bad news. Now, when asked if anything unusual happened that night, Irv is tight-lipped, which makes sense since we know Irv is up to something on the side that he probably doesn't want Milchick to learn about. Milchick is still a little suspicious, but he can't get anything else out of him before he delivers the bad news. Now next, he heads over to Dylan's house. Note how Milchick's tone comes off as indifferent to Dylan's situation. He's still mad about what happened. Now Dylan is shocked by the bad news, and his first thought is, what will he tell his wife? Which might be a sign or a signal that he has some serious money problems. Next up, Milchick visits Mark, and he's still at his sister's place after the book reading event is just clearing out. Now, right before he arrives, Devin brings up the accusations that Mark's innie made about Gemma being alive. Mark either doesn't believe it or finds the idea too difficult to deal with, so he's resisting Devin's suggestion to look into things. This is of course when the doorbell rings and it's for Mark. Milchick uses his nice guy persona to interrogate Mark, but Devin gets involved and plays some interference. She doesn't trust this milkshake character at all, and she starts pressing him about how Selvig managed to insert herself into their personal lives. Now Mark and Devin present a united front here, and they give Milchick nothing. But note that while Dylan and Irv got canned, Milchick expects to see Mark return to work on Monday. Milchick even tries to pull a head game by playing on Mark's empathy for his innie. "You'd be killing your innie," he tells him in a way that only Milchick can. So Irv and Dylan aren't needed anymore, but Mark, they want him back. Very interesting. So now let's talk about the scene where Irv produces a map with Burt Goodman's name on it. He means to find him, but we don't know if he even knows who Burt is at this point, at least to his Audi. But we're going to come back to this in a minute. The next important scene is when we see Helly checking the surveillance camera recordings of the night. She finds footage of the moment Helly and Mark first kiss before she gets in the elevator. Now Helly's response seems to read as intrigued, and it looks as though she's discovered that her innie's romantic interest in Mark might be the key to exploiting them both. Now there is a sense that there's something else going on here though. It could just be that my tinfoil hat is wrapped a little too tight, but I almost get the feeling that she knows Audi Mark, or perhaps interacted with him in the past. It makes me wonder if she knew Gemma before this, or had something to do with Gemma being kidnapped by Lumen. I know that's out there right now, but it's a possibility. The most sensible answer is that she's just intrigued at the thought that her innie is having a completely different life than her own. Maybe some things that she's missing in her own life. Now, Mark still wants to confront Kobelvig, because he's got a few questions to ask her. She's been lying to him the entire time he's known her, and she's the only neighbor he has, so yeah, I get it. Anyone in his situation would want some answers. Now he's dedicated. It looks like this man was posted up all day trying to catch Kobelvig slipping. He'll get his reward by the end of the episode. Now, next up, we're with Audi Dylan, a character we know very little about, so needless to say, I studied this one frame by frame. Dylan has money problems, as in he needs a lot of it. He has at least 2 kids by the sound of it, so the struggle is real. So Dylan shows up for this job interview with a guy called Mr. Saliba at a Dora manufacturing plant of all places. Now he's clearly desperate to get this job, willing to say anything to please this dude, but notice how he's so relieved when he finds out he can get medical coverage through his work. I know this makes no sense to non-Americans, but trust me when I tell you that we also think it makes no sense. I digress. Anyway, things are going okay for a while, but then Saliba has a change of heart when he finds out that Dylan was a severed worker. Apparently there is a stigma that comes along with that when it comes to the general public, and he doesn't get the job. This version of Dylan is quite different from the innie we're used to. And I'm starting to think that in Dylan's case, his innie is the person he wishes he was, the confident go-getter who never loses. But in reality, Dylan struggles to make ends meet and take care of his family while maintaining his self-image. Could this be part of why he chose to get severed? Anyway, I want to draw attention to where Mr. Saliba says that Lumen makes their doors in-house. That sounds like a weird thing to bring up, but I think it's a reminder of how O&D makes things like hatchets and other random items, probably because Lumen wants to keep their secrets to themselves. So the interview was a bust, but while Dylan is sitting in his car, he gets a check-in call from his wife, and we confirm that he has a newborn because he tells her he's gonna go pick up some wipes. Now I'm still wondering why they're hiding Gretchen from us. No theories yet, it's just crinkling my tinfoil a little bit, but I just find it kind of strange that we haven't seen this person yet. I wonder if it's gonna be a surprise. So Devin is still on that Gemma is alive thing. She's not letting this go. Now she's sitting with Mark at Pips, of all places, to try and convince him to use his access to Lumen to do some digging. But Mark is still not there yet. In fact, he's talking about quitting. Honestly, I think he's quitting just to put this idea to bed. Now, a key piece of information we get from the scene is that Mark ID'd the body when Gemma passed. So he's feeling pretty confident that Gemma is gone and that his innie must have been talking about something else. Things devolve into a misery competition between these two, well, really just for Mark, and Mark's out. But we also find out that Mr. Drummond has been eavesdropping on this conversation. So we've got confirmation that Lumen knows that Devin is sniffing around their little secret. Also, notice the weird tattoo. It says Frolic. We know what that means, but why is he wearing that as a tattoo? Anyway, so back over to Audi Irv. He's having a sneaky phone call at a phone booth when a car pulls up not far from him. Now, based on the fit and the way he's moving, he's living his best detective noir film life, and he doesn't want to be noticed. Now, a car pulls up as he's talking, and we can barely hear what he's saying, but from what I could tell, he says something like, "Okay, you're not picking up, I get it. In any case, my innie got the message." Maybe not exactly the words, but something to that effect. Oh, this is This is spicy. Now I bet I know what part of this got your attention. As we suspected last season, Audi Irv is using the paintings and the coffee to try to reach his innie subliminally. He may also be trying other methods that we're not aware of yet. But by the looks of things, Irv is working with someone else on this job. My first guess is Dr. Ragabi. I think she may be the contact. She'd be the best person to pass him names of severed people in town. I'm sure we'll get more about this later, but that's all we have for now. Now we learned that the man in the car is Burt Goodman, so we might assume that Irv contacted him. Maybe they're meeting each other here for the first time. It's hard to say until we get more from the scene, but it's also possible that he wasn't invited. We have to remember that when the OTC was cut off, Innie Irv was banging on Burt's door. So it's possible that Audi Irv spoke with Burt and may have identified him in that way. It's possible that Burt looked him up by doing a little investigating of his own. But man, wouldn't it be crazy if their Audis were actually enemies on the outside? So in the next scene, Mark gets a late night visit from a Milchick bearing gifts. Small bribe to sweeten the offer. Milchick is here to convince Mark to come back to work at Lumen, so he begins laying out all of the incentives, including a 20% pay raise, the promise that a third party will be hired to check in on his innie's welfare, and finally, the real bait. Milchick tells Mark that his innie is involved in a romantic relationship and that it would be good for them to both let that develop. He does this after bringing up Gemma and the pain that he's dealing with from her loss. So he's implying here that the happiness his innie experiences will find its way over to him, assuming he means via the subconscious link between the two sides. Notice how in both these scenes, Mark and Irving's characters are confirmed to have severed personas that they're still very much connected to on a subliminal level. It's confirming that they can in fact influence their severed innies indirectly. This is a curious thing for Milchick to bring up, and I can't help but think that Helly is behind this particular tactic. Now, we can't say for sure, but the statement seems to be what makes Mark change his mind. And I think part of the reason is because he's becoming suspicious of Milchick and Lumen by extension for even bringing the subject of his deceased wife up. Now, the next cut jumps to Mark in the parking lot, indicating that he reluctantly took the deal. Ellie is in conference with Milchick, Natalie, and Mr. Drummond at this time, and Natalie is there on behalf of the board as usual. She asks about the replacements coming into work with Mark because, as you might recall in the season opener, Mark was the only original member of MDR to come back initially. Milchick made it seem like they refused to come back, but we found out that that was a lie. They were fired. Mark's innie's antics did drive Lumen to rehire the old MDR team just so they could keep him happy. This is another signal to us that Mark is important to Lumen, likely because he's the best shot they have at completing the Cold Harbor file, aka the Miss Casey file. Now the events of episode 1 make perfect sense. A key takeaway from this scene is that the word came directly from the board to give Mark what he wants. So we might assume that this Cold Harbor project is special in some way, and they really need to get this done. I mean, Lumen fired the replacements and got the band back together for this file. Given what they've already experienced with this crew, that's a huge risk to take. Now, there is a massive debate going on about which version of Helly goes down to the severed floor. Some fans say this is Audi Helly pretending to be Innie Helly. Now, the show creators touch on the subject, but they don't give us much, so we can't say for sure. But the evidence for this is pretty compelling, I have to say. For one, Helly's last memory when the OTC was cut off should have been her standing at the podium at the gala. But when she gets off the elevator, she does this. I don't feel like that lines up. When MDR talks about what they saw on the outside, Helly gives them a story that makes no sense. A night gardener. This could be because she's trying to hide her real identity, but the lines come off as an impromptu excuse she just thought up. She wasn't ready for this. And then of course, there's a time she fumbles the power button on her computer, something she should have been able to do on autopilot. Now, if this turns out to be true and she is Audi Helly, these discrepancies would make sense. But I think Helly might be working alone here. In other words, nobody knows that this is Audi Helly except her, not even Milchick. This is definitely something to keep an eye on because I'm not 100% ready to say that she is Audi Helly. So now to that final scene. Remember how Mark was stalking Kobilvik's house to try and catch her? He finally does so in the end. And I love how nonchalant she is about it at first, as if nothing happened. Just typical neighbor banter. Notice how she treats him like an innie here, expressing disappointment in his choice to return to working at Lumen. Kobilvik always wanted him to quit, suggesting that she has some issues with Severance, or at least she recognizes that this thing is a detriment to people who undergo the procedure. Maybe this is all coming from first-hand experience. Anyway, I think she forgot that this is not any Mark though, because she's surprised when he steps out in front of her car blocking her exit. He asks her plainly if she knows something about Gemma, and you can tell this question cut deep. She does know what's going on. For a few moments, she seems like she's about to crack. I thought maybe she'd help him out, throw him a bone or something. But no, Cobill's rage bubbles up and she nearly runs Mark over as she peels out, screaming like a feral cat, giving him absolutely nothing. Yeah, that sounds about right. Lumen wronged this woman in some way, and whatever it is, it goes deep. Alright, so that's it for coverage of episode 2. At some point, I'm going to start gathering up all these clues and we're going to start doing some theory videos. So if you want to get a shout out or something like that, make sure you get in the comments section. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you already know what to do. Be safe out there, tinfoilers, and until next time, off you go.